advantage. And we're happy that all of us are joining us today to explore this most important topic. There are a series of activities that we are going to be doing today, including also launch of two very important documents, or showcase of two documents which were graciously launched by our regional director for the East and Southern Africa region. One is a regional innovation and digital transformation strategy, which is supposed to help UNFPA accelerate our transformative results, which you would all know. That one, to ensure that we meet the unmet need for family planning. We also ensure that we end maternal deaths and prevent harmful practices against women and girls. Secondly, we will be also launching a toolkit, a social innovation toolkit, a toolkit that has been developed for young people and startups that would guide young people to go through end to end from one stage to the other in terms of your business growth or the business cycle process. What is most important for us now is how we can ensure that young people access the tools that they need to get us there. So to ensure that we have an exciting conversation and also everybody participates fully, we encourage all to mute your microphones and then also your videos, except of course for our speakers today. And then so ensure that you have minimum distractions around you. We're going to be having a series of conversations, including the panel, which would allow for us all to have an opportunity to make inputs in the conversations that we will have. And when the time is up for those, you are welcome to post the comments or questions that you have in the chat, and we will be able to take your inputs and take it forward. If you have any question to ask, please do well to put it in there. And we might also have opportunities for you to put your hand up and ask any questions that you have to discuss. So without wasting any much of the time, I'll please join me and welcome the Deputy Regional Director for the United Nations Population Fund, our regional office here in Johannesburg, covering 23 countries within the region, Ms. Chinwe Obona, who is going to give us the welcome address. Chinwe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sydney. And it's great to be here and seeing the different names. I'm trying to figure out, when I see the names, I'm trying to figure out which location that everyone is joining from. So allow me to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. And I'd like to start by recognizing our partners who are joining us today from the African Development Bank, from the Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance, AVPA, from the Kala Africa, policy actors in our midst, technocrats, amongst others. But most important, I see a lot of young people that I recognize their names in the virtual room. Thank you for the drive and your persistence. You are the ones that continue to keep us on our toes and making sure that our collective actions to leverage the power of innovation and digitalization remains true. And this is just because of your quest for transformative change. A big shout out to our colleagues who are joining us from across UNFPA business units, regional offices, country offices. In particular, I'd like to recognize Dr. Nigina Munten, the Chief of Innovation Unit at UNFPA headquarters. Thank you, Nigina, for your leadership and your collaborations with us in the East and Southern Africa region, and by extension across our footprint in Africa. We truly appreciate it. All the presence of everyone here today affirms the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So I believe that collectively, we will be able to contribute to the much needed efforts that will unlock financing for innovation and digital technology and related solutions that will improve the health, the well-being, and potentials of women, adolescents, and youth in Africa. I bring you warm greetings from our regional director, Miss Lydia Zigomo, who would have loved to be here, but is not able to due to a clash in commitments. But she warmly welcomes all of you to this very important dialogue. And like Sydney says, this dialogue focusing on financing, innovation, and digital transformation for women and youth in Africa. And he ably said it, that in our region, which is rapidly evolving, which is dynamic, which is diverse across its 23 countries, innovation and digital technology are no longer buzzwords. They are truly lifelines that are powering us towards sustainable development, which, if I may add, also aligns with the aspirations of actualizing the Africa we want. So it's not a surprise that we're having this conversation, considering that Africa's innovation and technology sector is credited as being one of the fastest growing in the world. In less than a decade, the industry has contributed significantly to economic development, sustainable livelihoods, and decent jobs for women and youth. For instance, the mobile technology industry is said to have contributed 9% of total GDP of Africa in 2019. It generated about 1.7 million jobs, and I'm glad that Africa Development Bank is here in our midst because they know this much more than us, contributing roughly about 144 billion in economic value, both in the formal and informal sector. And we know that in the formal and informal sector, the significant proportion of the workers there are women and youth. And so it's very important for us to continue to pay attention to the fact that even across our continent, that access to mobile broadband infrastructure continues to vary. There are about 83% of population who have access to mobile internet coverage. So translating to absolute numbers, about 515 million unique individuals. But the critical thing about this number, this 83%, is out of this, only 46% have subscription to internet network operators. So that means we have a group that are still left behind who require access to internet or who continue to connect through 2G or other low bandwidth connectivity, and continues to limit their potential to meaningfully engage. So we know that the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, ICA, highlights that this growing private sector investment in innovation and digital technology can indeed bridge the gaps that is faced in the financing of innovation and digital tech. And so, for example, about 7.1 billion committed to ICT investments in 2018. From that, 4.8, so roughly more than half, came from private sector alone. So I'd like to recognize our private sector in our midst again and say to them that your collaborations continue to power the unique opportunities for young people and women across the continent. And we know this because innovation and digital tech is very critical now in health, in education, in social protection, in nutrition, and the one we all know in economic empowerment. In UNFPA, we see these opportunities and potentials continue to grow. We continue to engage women and youth-led startups and innovation initiatives, as Sydney said, towards achieving our transformative results. And we do have another region-specific transformative result, which is around ending sexual transmission to HIV, because we continue to bear the greatest burden of HIV across the world. So it's very critical for us to continue to leverage innovation and digital tech in this regard. You can see me moving back and forth because there's an automatic switch off of energy conserving lights, because we continue to use every access to increase efficiencies and effectiveness in the work that we do. And related to that is the fact that income inequality for young people continues to be very important. And it is important because it has multiplier effects and it continues to limit access to information, access to services for young people. So it's very important for us to continue to tap into the Africa startups that our young people are leading, which we know raised about 6.5 billion through 764 deals that were struck, and which was an increase of about 8% from 2021 to 2022. So big up to the young people in the house and young people elsewhere. Our innovation partner, whom I know it must be in the virtual space, AfriLabs, in their 2020 AfriLabs and Brita Bridges report, tells us that the continent had active tech hubs that enable startups to grow. So it's very important for us to continue to pay attention to resilience, to agility, to adaptive actions, so that these startups can navigate the disruptions and competing priorities that we know that the young people as Africa's greatest assets face. Why is it important for us to pay attention to this youthful population? Africa's population is projected to double or even more by 2050, representing about 25% of the world's population, and will remain the fastest growing continent or region until 2100, so 2100, when Africa's youth will be equivalent to twice of Europe's entire population, which will also represent the fact that one half of the world's youth will be from Africa with a median age of about 35 years. So we cannot help but be mindful of what happens to the leadership of the youth across sectors of our economy and within societies. So your presence here today, the young people, is very important. For us in UNFPA, breakthroughs in AI, robotics, machine learning, Internet of Things, amongst others, continue to impact the life and the world at a rapid pace. And we see it in the work that we do. And because of that, we're leveraging quite a lot of that in our work. We're using drones in Botswana and Madagascar to deliver essential commodities. We're using AI to develop training curricula for midwives. We're using AI to generate content for various bodies of our work, including communication and branding, to mention a few. So definitely game changers that will be important for us to make sure that we secure the scale and pace of financing required to make a difference. But we do know that we have to match this with regulatory standards and quality assurance mechanisms. So looking forward to the conversations that will happen today around these areas, including cyber security, safeguarding, digital skills, infrastructure, because we know that our young people, especially young girls, are facing tech-facilitated gender-based violence. So we need to make sure that we safeguard them. So as I begin to close, allow me to highlight that only collective actions, no single entity can do this. So only collective actions will deliver the aspirations for present and future generations. And we as UNFPA recommit to this. We recommit to supporting all phases of ideation, co-creation, startup, scaling up, and the rest of them that you'll have conversations around today, because we need to unlock the complex issues that continue to limit the pace of acceleration towards right and choices for all. And like Sydney highlighted, as you have this conversation around our regional innovation and digital transformative strategy and the social innovation toolkit, I'm so glad that Nigina will be speaking to us about the global dialogue on tech that is happening next week, Thursday and Friday in New York, and how we can make sure that the outcome from here feeds into that. And not just only that, but into the global compact, digital compact, that is part of the Pact of the Future, because this is a new international consensus that we all need to make sure there's a section 3, and in addition to the Global Digital Compact, that we need to make sure that the young people are shaping the content of that. By that, we will make a difference in the life of the 10-year-old girl who is at risk of harmful practices and gender-based violence, the mother who is at risk of losing her life while giving life, the woman or youth who needs to make decisions about their bodily autonomy across the life course, and the potentials of millions of adolescents and young people which can be disrupted if we're not careful. So looking forward to active participation, experience sharing, no right or wrong. Please do lay it on the line. And I thank you again for joining. Back to you, Sydney.
Thank you very much, Chime, for setting the tone for this lineup for the next set of conversations that we're going to have. I am particularly excited because, like you had indicated, we have a very, very strong lineup of speakers, and it's quite an envy for many to have this experienced speakers who are going to be sharing with us. But before we get into that, I would like to provide a bit of context and a bit of background around what we do with our work in innovation here at the UNFPA within the region. And if you don't mind, I will project this really quickly. um, and share with all of us. Can we confirm if you can see my screen? There we go. So the work that we do at UNFPA with innovation, it looks at how we can explore acceleration of the work that we do. The
Sydney, do
one,
you want to put it on the display setting because it's showing your dual? Yeah,
right. There we go. Pardon me.
perfect.
There we go. Right. So our work around innovation looks at facilitating the transformative results, and we are looking at transformational shifts in policy, health systems, and building community resilience. And all of these is informed by the principles of innovation that the United Nations has adopted for all of the work that we do. And all of this is aimed at supporting governments, communities, and our partners to develop solutions that are driven by young people, women, communities, and partnerships with private sector that can help us accelerate these outcomes that we seek. And as the Secretary General has said, without innovation, there's no way we can overcome the challenges of our times. And so it is you and my responsibility that we all drive innovation in the work that we do. And how do we do this? We do this, as I'd indicated, through private sector partnerships with governments and other stakeholders to deploy digital technology, including technology tools, including drones and artificial intelligence and blockchain and the likes that again help us to ensure that one, we are reaching communities that are left behind or communities that are difficult to reach, to be reached with commodities, to be reached with information and other reproductive health services. We also are doing this work through partnerships, development of digital platforms for young people. For example, is our TuneMe virtual platform, which has reached over 2 million young people per year who go through this platform to access sexual and reproductive health and rights information and services. As I had indicated, young people form the core of the work we do with innovation within the region. And so the toolkits that we are launching today, as you would know, and the title indicates, seeks to support young people and youth-led, most importantly, also women-led startups to be able to get the support that they need to grow their solution from beginning to end. One big challenge is that these young people access these opportunities that we create for them. But beyond accessing these, what happens to their solutions? One of the key challenges that always emerge is we need access to financial services. We need access to capacity building and support to grow our solutions. And this toolkit and the rest of the work that we do through some projects, for instance, like the Hack Labs program that we ran, aim again to provide these needed supports that young people have. But this conversation, most importantly today, we're hoping would help us unlock new ways of financing sustainably these solutions, but also supporting innovation generally and supporting digital transformation, especially to help us as a continent to build forward better beyond COVID. So in doing this work, we're looking at mainstreaming innovation across our programs, deploying digital tools and technologies, and also partnering with communities to ensure that we are able to meet the needs of communities, especially the sexual and reproductive health needs of communities, both in the humanitarian and the development spaces. So if you don't mind and would permit me, we would showcase today for you the strategy document, and also the toolkit, and explainer video that showcases exactly what these tools seek to do and how you and I can interact with them. So over to you if you can help us play the explainer videos. We're missing the sound. If you may play with the sound.
discuss the brand original innovation and transformation strategy. Now, know what you need. And a strategy summary. Trust me, this is about that. In a world where one has to be healthy, happy, make the choices of our lives. So, in a world where pregnancy is dead, child safe, every young can achieve their potential. This benefit is for all, especially young people, me. At times, issues, poverty, lack of education, climate change, violence, discrimination, limited access to effective health services, make it difficult to achieve quicker, more efficient, and cheaper. Remember, the world plan is by 20. This is where digital and digital innovation comes in. The strategy toolbox filled with fears, practical tools that will allow you and I to work through and to read the faster and better. The details of UNFPA continue to power of technology and mobile technology and enough artificial intelligence and technology to improve the of information, commodity, and others. It also brings out UNA will work for countries who are connected very non-technology, and this sort of makes it relevant. From 2020, UNA will need to improve all process and programs as an expedia. These core purposes strategizes the review of connector. So next time you're about the NFPA, they're not about the report. They're about the people like you and me. Keep our lives better. We can be part of the solution. Join us, spirit to
Right, thank you. So could we see the video for the toolkit? And we will share this video with all of us. We would have them available on our social media platforms. And then also, as you'd see, it would be on the UNFPA East and Southern Africa Regional website for us to download to get a better understanding of what the strategy document seeks to achieve.
So the song that we're going to see today is My African. Couldn't be more perfect for today because it expresses hopes, dreams, and our dream to let children around the world know that just because you brought poverty, it doesn't mean you are poverty.
Well, pretty exciting. From all the way to South Africa, and you are now the biggest talents in the world. I can't hear what you do.
Right, so it looks like there is a terrible connection issue with the sound. So please let's stop sharing. Let's jump straight into our conversation for today, which is critical to again the toolkits and the strategy documents that we are looking to push to support the work of young people within the continent. Now, as I indicated earlier, we have a powerful lineup of speakers, and I'm particularly excited, and I hope that you will be as excited as I am, who are going to join us in our discussion today. And the topic we have is to explore financing innovation and digital transformation in Africa. Is this a hoax or a reality? And our panel would explore from different perspectives, especially those around the areas of work that they focus on. The first speaker for us today is going to be Mr. Mark Marangu from Total Register, one of the UNFPA innovators, our 2022 winners of the UNFPA Hack Labs, the FGM Hack Lab. And he's going to be sharing with us his experience with raising financing as an innovator and the challenges that he's experienced. And he will set the tone for us. Mark is a dedicated youth leader and an advocate for social justice and gender equality. And as indicated, a founder of Total Register, which leverages technology to combat harmful practices and enhance child protection systems. He is a member of the sector working group and actively engaged in initiatives that promote equity, sustainable development, and end to harmful practices. Mark, you would have 5 minutes. Please share with us your context, and then I would introduce my other speakers for the panel after your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sydney. I apologize for the situation which I'm joining this meeting in. The situation in Nairobi is actually very tricky and risky right now for all of us. Our offices have been tear gassed due to the demonstrations happening. So I'm actually at the staircase. I'm joining you from the staircase. I'll try to be as clear as possible, and I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. So allow me to turn off my video. Okay, so my name is Mark Marangu from Kenya. I'm the lead and founder of Total Register. Total Register is actually a UNFPA supported innovation from its very beginning, from as early as it was an idea that sought to bridge the gap between child protection stakeholders as they strive to integrate real-time data usage in the protection of children and particularly response to FGM. So Total Register has had a brilliant journey since 2022, where we won the UNFPA 2022 FGM Hack Lab. This really opened an opportunity for us to be able to develop our idea into a concept. And ideally, having a concept from an idea is actually the first step towards investing in the innovation. So UNFPA did not just fund us as winners for the 2022 FGM Hack Lab. They actually helped us build our business structure, our revenue models. That is through the incubation and acceleration program with AfriLabs. And since 2022, the register has been able to win several other innovation awards and challenges, such as the Save the Children Digital Innovation Challenge and an Impact Award at the ESD Awards in the category of civic participation and governance. So the register has been able to actually not just develop from a concept to an actual product, but it has been able to gain traction and gain acceptance in the community, since our very key principles are actually building for and with the community. And I'll jump straight to a few of the challenges that I faced as a young innovator in the space. So, of course, being a young person, we are not really gifted with having too much connections or doors that we can directly knock to. But one of the things UNFPA has done for us is UNFPA has given us a voice and an actual name to be able to actually introduce ourselves in offices. They've given us administrative support and technical support that assists us in actually approaching other investors and other funders. And apart from that, we've also, some of the opportunities we've received from UNFPA are actually participating in other hack clubs, such as the 2023 WeScale Hack Club, which was the hack club for previous winners. And it was a brilliant opportunity for us to exchange notes, to learn from each other, and to even pitch to the wide audience of people who had joined for the UNFPA Innovation Harmful Practices Innovation Summit that was held in Nairobi, Kenya last year. So and just to mention on the challenges that we face as young innovators, we are not really, we do not really have the biggest sort of businesses to be able to bid for, let's say, tenders and investments from large companies, large organizations, and the government agencies. But we try as much as possible to leverage on the connections that we have and the patronage that we have under UNFPA. So aside from the challenges which have directly provided us opportunities to think outside the box as a young startup, we've also been able to deploy pilots in collaboration with UNFPA in an FGM high-risk region, and also deploy another low-cost pilot in the largest refugee camp in Africa, which is the Dadaab Refugee Complex. And which we were able to pilot in collaboration with, of course, UNFPA, Save the Children, and UNHCR, who hosted us at the camp when we were there. And these are some of the opportunities I see that present themselves as challenges, because when we are not able to, as young people, when we do not have the money that we feel that we need to deploy these pilots to test our innovation, it actually reminds us that we need to talk to the organizations that are contributing to similar objectives that we're contributing to, such as UNFPA, and they've been able to open doors for us. So I really appreciate what UNFPA is doing for young people, young innovators, especially now with the launch of the toolkit and the strategies as well. We are hopeful that we'll be able to get more opportunities to share with other investors and funders across Africa. Thank you very much, Sydney.
Thank you very much, Mark. And as always, inspiring to hear you speak. And I'll highlight a few of the challenges that innovators like himself face on the continent. And sustainable financing or funding is always one of the key challenges that these innovators face. Now, I would go into my panel, who would be joining us in this conversation. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Negina Muntien, who is the chief of the innovation branch. So she has over 25 years of experience working in sexual and reproductive health and rights, including maternal health, family planning. She's worked with UNFPA and the World Health Organization, as well as the International Planned Parenthood Federation, including also Doctors Without Borders and several public and private sector companies within the Pacific East and West, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia regions. As an obstetrician and gynecologist, and a global public health advocate for women's empowerment through ensured access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. Now, I would ask Dr. Muntien to speak to us really quickly. Listening to what Mark had indicated, how is UNFPA funding and financing women-centric tech innovations and ensuring that these young people or young women are able to identify financing opportunities, and what are some of the gaps that have been identified in implementing tech?
Thank you, Sydney and Chinwe, for having me here, and it's really a pleasure and honor. You forgot to mention one key quality in my portfolio, how you and I were collaborating around innovation and how we're advancing in this journey. And indeed, what you mentioned and the topic of this discussion is super important. And this is where UNFPA is now really taking off. And it's also encouraging to see how we are advancing in understanding, but also in delivering in that area. And let me start with what Chinwe also alluded to. This year, we celebrate the 30th year anniversary of the groundbreaking international conference on population and development, which took place in Cairo in 1994. And we market with the 3 global dialogues. One was on youth in Benin, in Cotonou. One was on population dynamics in Bangladesh, Dhaka. And the concluding one will be conducted next year in New York. And we will be celebrating the rights-based inclusive technology that drive progress for women and girls. And really, there's a lot to celebrate over the last 30 years. So much happened, so much advancements and development happened in progressing women's health, well-being, and rights. But the progress is unequitable. Not everybody have equitable access to solutions, to financing and funding of specifically women-led and women-centric solutions are one of the major gaps which stall the progress. And that's why this conversation today will be so important for us as we take a lot of the key takeaways from today's conversation towards the global dialogue on technology. So let's just quickly also go, what are the gaps in addition to what the previous speakers already mentioned. So we know that women drive progress and development, but their needs are really ignored almost in a lot of the solutions, and designing the solutions, including financial algorithms, when the funding decision is allocated and decided to whom it goes. The finance gap for women entrepreneurs is estimated about 1.7 trillion globally. And statistics shows that less than 4% of the venture capitalist funding goes to female-led enterprises. Women entrepreneurs get only 5.2% of total credit outstanding that all banks provide to the medium and small-sized entrepreneurs. And only 4% of the tech investments goes in life sciences goes to women-focused technology. However, the stakes are high, but opportunities are even higher. We know that investment in women's empowerment, including through access to funding and financing, can unlock additional 12 trillion by 2030, with about $1 trillion a year, basically, at least. And how we can meet their needs, how we can close the gaps. We need to meet women where they are. We shouldn't make it as a cliche, an assumption, and copy paste from something which exists, because a lot of those solutions do not even work for women. So we need to create solutions and access to funding and financing that suits their needs, that suits their capacity, and we need to invest in their capacity on financial skills and business management skills. We need to use evidences, not assumptions. Women are, in fact, better loan returners than men, and gender equality in businesses can increase profitability and productivity by 40%, and those are hard facts. So we need to invest in women, and we need to include women when such solutions are designed. Catalytic programs are really great for solving those gaps. It's been long established that since women are more likely than men to spend resources on supporting their families and communities, that increase in women's income is cascading in terms of the welfare of household communities and economies. Well, we have a lot of women and men around this, so to say, virtual table. We know who purchases not only for the individual needs, but for entire family, who makes doctor's appointments and makes sure all family members have health checkups and treatments and purchases around healthcare, who ensure nutritional and educational needs for all family. The list goes on, and I will not doubt your intelligence because you know the answer. So investment in women benefits everyone. So how do we address it at UNFPA? We are still at the beginning of the journey, but we are really expediting the speed. We address it both through investment and the advocacy. We use our convening power to bring together public and private sector under the Equity 2030 Alliance, where we are closing the gaps in gender equitable and women-centric solutions in technology, science, and financing. And we do it across 120 countries where we work. We invest also. We invest in women-centric and women-led social enterprises through the Equalizer Accelerator Fund. In 2 years, we already are now in our 4th Innovation Challenge, and a lot of it really inspired by what the Eastern Southern Africa is doing in terms of investing in the startups, especially female entrepreneurs. And we know most of them at the beginning of their journey are not investable. So what our funds are really catalytic. We invest in them to make them investable, to bring them to the investors' markets with the maturity where they can access this funding and financing. And this year, we're launching a new funding and financing facility to deliver advanced solutions to transform health of women and girls. We call it Women X Collective, with a collective of hubs to source advanced solutions, fund the proof of concept, and finance the scale. One of the hubs will be open in Nairobi, so stay tuned. And just to repeat again, equitable world is a reality, and we all have role in shaping it. And with that, just thank you, and over to you back, Sydney.
Thank you very much, Nagina. And you couldn't have summed it up, right? And I think largely the work that we do also within the Eastern Southern Africa region looks at how we have, for instance, engaged over 650 young people. Over 50% of those happen to be women and girls. And the interesting fact, and Chinwe and I have this conversation all the time, is that it's without any deliberate affirmative action. So somehow the ecosystem is doing something right. And that's what I'm looking to see that Dr. Gitao would touch on in her intervention when she speaks next, around what the landscape for financing and funding looks like currently within the wider technology and innovation space, and what the opportunities are for young innovators, including young women and girls. So please allow me to introduce Dr. Gitao. She's the CEO of Kala, a digital innovation company that catalyzes digital transformation capabilities for organizations across Africa. She has over 10 years of experience in research, design, implementation, management of digital technologies, etc. She's established an expertise in both Africa and emerging markets, specializing in solution for critical problems in agriculture, education, health, payments, retail, and renewable energies. Dr. Gitao, over to you.
Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me? Oh, perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, evening, morning, from wherever you are. I'm in very sunny Johannesburg this afternoon, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much. I have just a couple of slides, meaning 2, not 100, but like an African would say, but it's just 2. Because I thought it is important to set context when you're talking about financing for innovation in digital tech. I had thought I was going to be the initial speaker. So my presentation was like just setting base on what it means to finance innovation. And as a recovering academia, I only start with the beginning. What are the key phases of innovation? Because before we know what we are financing, we need to know where we are financing it from. So I picked this, I don't know, is it moving? Yeah, perfect. So we always say you have to use, like, you know, we need to know the end from the beginning. And journey maps are like a tool we use primarily in technology and innovation to map out a user journey, customer journey, product journey. And I felt like it was important to say what is an innovation journey. And then based on this, how do we then start financing it? So the very beginning, whether it's digital transformation or innovation, the very beginning of it is initiation. You get an idea, and we've heard from the previous 2 speakers around the idea coming. It was an idea that came into my mind, all of that stuff. It is the first part of it. Like, we want to transform. We've been working with UNFPA for the past 3 years now. Oh my God, it's such a long time, since 2021, in their digital transformation journey. It is an idea to make a difference in something. So it started with an idea, then you explore idea into how do you convert this idea into something tangible. So you build prototypes and you test the prototypes, and then the best idea wins at prototype because it's the tangibility of it, right? And then you develop it, and then you take it to market, yeah? And the market is what decides whether an idea is feasible or not. And feasibility is not just being able to build, is whether the customers actually like it and 2, can buy it. So given this journey map, whether you're doing it from a digital point of view or from just an innovation point of view, it is important to map this out when you're thinking, how do we innovate this journey map? Because that's how you're thinking. Based on all these stages, there are maybe 8 stages, but there are three critical stages from initiation, implementation, and into market. How do you start financing it? What are the areas of financing? So I listed a number of ways of financing, and I just want to be able to walk you through. And I'm happy that Aswani is on the call, because the last part of it is him. So the first one is bootstrapping. When you have an idea in your head and you're trying to sell it to people, it's very hard to sell just an idea. So you bootstrap, and bootstrapping means that you're putting your own money into it, your resources. And I always say, financing a startup is not necessarily about money. It's mostly about time. Yeah. Are you able to take an hour or two or a day or two out of your normal day to be able to start bootstrapping and building this product, or convincing your friends to come along and build, or convincing your other people, your colleagues, or your manager to come along and support you? That is the bootstrapping of it. And it's really bootstrapping. Yeah, it's boots and trapping around, talking to people, putting in effort, putting in money. And I'll give you an example. There's a product I built in one of the big tech companies I worked with, and only two of us. And we bootstrapped it by basically building something and basically using a deck, got a low fidelity prototype, and walking around to be able to sell the idea, because it was very hard to conceptualize it if you had not interacted with it. Then the second part, and because you're in Africa, you need a high risk investment that is going to allow you to experiment. And grants are good. And that's where organizations like the UNFPA and other partners would come in. They give you a bit of grant to move you from that bootstrapping space to trying to testing it into market. And still, it's very prototyping. It's very testing the market and looking at it. Again, if we are working on like the product, the total register, you need somebody to be able to believe in you, to be able to know that this idea is valid. Can you take it a little bit to market? The other one I've seen, especially in this generation, is crowdsourcing, where everybody is putting in a little bit of money to be able to enable you to build your product. This one, the next one, is one that is controversial, especially because I'm not super excited about the current funding model that for Africa, the VC hyperscaling model does not work for Africa. Yeah, because we don't have that hyperscale and velocity type of market where if I introduce something, I'll get 100,000 users within 6 months and then 20 million users within 5 years. That's the VC model. It is always rapidly getting subscription and users. I'd rather you get funded by your income and revenue. So in the process of crowdsourcing and grants is you need to have a strong business model. I mean, at Kala, we have a venture studio. And one of the key things we tell our founders is that we need to know that we have a path to profitability, which means that we are thinking about profitability from the very beginning. And some products are not going to be profitable. They're going to be impactful. But we need to have a clear path to a way that they're going to generate income. And income can be being paid for by a grant, a funder or a donor, or being paid for by your customer. And that is critical, especially when you're thinking about Africa, because of just our market dynamics. So we are split into 55 countries, which are very, very small, apart from Nigeria. We are not that, we have like language barriers, we have trade barriers, we have regulation barriers. So when you're thinking about your business, you need to make sure that you're thinking of it from an income and a revenue point of view, not just from raising another round of funding. And at that point, if you're able to start calibrating your brain around income and revenue, then you actually have a path to actually attracting the right type of venture capitalists. And I say the right type there are many types of VCs, but they're the types of VCs that are very greenfield. They are very patient in terms of they don't want to just to build and exit. They want to be able to work with you in a way that you can scale and then they can exit at a later date, not the 5 to 7 year time period that most VCs give. And the good thing in Africa, and I'm sure Frank is going to talk about it, there are many upcoming local venture capitalists and angel groups that understand our market dynamics and have a little bit of leeway in terms of how much time they're giving up founders to actually be able to give a return to their money. Because this thing of being able to raise money every 18 months is not viable for the African continent. And finally is private equity. And private equity means that you're able to literally grow your business and sell a large chunk of its equity. And this actually is one of the most successful ways of investments in Africa, way better than VC funding, because it actually understands the African dynamics. It's been there for ages. It's been before the hype of startups. It's been there, and it helps quite large scale scaling, for lack of a better phrasage for it, and it allows growing beyond your current comfort zone. And the final one, which is not on my list, is actually just listing in the BOWS, listing in the stock exchange, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, the different stock exchanges, where you're attracting money from the public, which is we've not seen in large extent, especially the last 5 years. Listing for African-based in African, listing companies from in Africa on African stock exchanges has been extremely slow. I think MTN Uganda has just listed in the secondary market, maybe the last 3 weeks. But from like a startup innovation point of view, it's been non-existent, and even for larger companies, because the market has been quite crazy the last few years. I mean, COVID really messed all of us up. So that is what I wanted to just point out as what are the current models of fundraising, and just emphasize on where does Africa actually need. And for this particular context, it is, we need to be able, I will continue emphasizing, is we need to look at income and revenue, because that is how you build sustainable businesses that actually work for the African continent. I know my 5 minutes is finished, so thank you very much. And back to you, Sydney.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gital. I think you took us through quite decently the opportunities that are available for startups on the continent. And you raised some very interesting questions, which I'll bring Frank into the conversation. And probably, Frank, you might want to touch on this for just half a minute before you go into your actual response, which is to look at whether venture philanthropy in Africa, is it a myth or a reality? Especially coming from a point where you run a Pan-African network of investors on our continent, or Pan-African network of social investors who collaborate to increase deal flow of capitals, including grants, debt, equity, non-financial capital, as Shiko had indicated, towards impact across Africa. And addressing the end SDGs across the continent. So just to add that, Frank is of Kenyan origin, living in Johannesburg, and holds a veterinary medicine degree from the University of Nairobi and an MBA from Gibbs, and also from the University of South Africa. Now, the question I want to throw in for you to respond to before you go into your intervention, I picked this from what Dr. Gital said. Why can't we have profitability and impact coexisting in the same space?
A good question, Sydney. And I think that's another myth, is that you always have to compromise financial returns when you're talking about impact. But increasingly, evidence is showing us that profit and purpose are not mutually exclusive. You can do both. Those of you who follow us on social media, please go back and listen to a webinar I had. I hosted a guy called Alistair 3 weeks ago. And we're talking about the economies of mutuality. And we're talking about how do we convert profit, how do we convene profit and purpose? And Alistair was talking about a purpose-led strategy for corporates and for the private sector. And it's fascinating how that is changing. And one of the things that's forcing us to look at that, Sydney, is, you know, they say never waste a crisis. We're the generation that's been blessed with a couple of really good crises. COVID, Black Lives Matter, the Russia-Ukraine war. All these are opportunities for us to press some reset buttons and come out of them thinking and doing differently. It will be very sad to history if this generation does not do something different about where the world is going, more so when you were talking about people and planet. And we have a really good opportunity because people with money are also thinking differently. We look at things like Black Lives Matter. Many people probably thought that poverty in the US was a race thing, but it's actually a class thing. And we have more and more LPs who are demanding, when I talk about LPs, I'm talking about limited partners, people who tend to provide the large amounts of capital that fund managers who then deploy capital to SMEs, is they're asking themselves and they're demanding that their money does more than just provide financial returns. How do you make sure that that money also creates impact? So increasingly, we're seeing evidence of more purposeless strategies. We're seeing more evidence of impact and financial returns going hand in hand. So it's a myth that it's impossible. Sydney, you're muted.
There you go. So it's not necessarily impossible. It is still possible.
Very possible, very possible. And increasingly, more and more organizations are making it happen. And more and more organizations are being judged by their customers based on not just the ability to provide products or whatever, but are you doing it responsibly? Are you doing it with climate change and environmental protection in mind? Are you producing your foods with the least greenhouse gas emissions? So it's not impossible. And that we're seeing increasingly so.
Right. So there's that question that, you know, the African economy is the fastest growing in the world. There's all of that rhetoric. And increasingly, we are having an increasing number of net worth individuals on the continent. And philanthropy is not necessarily growing in accordance with the growth in the number of billionaires and millionaires that we are increasingly having on the continent. What are the opportunities that we have, for instance, with ADPA to ensure that young startups can begin to explore how to tap into some of these domestic resources that these philanthropists have as a source of financing for innovation and digital transformation?
Okay, that's a good question, Sydney. So let me take a step back with your question. So you're right. We have a challenge of the amount of money that local philanthropy can put into the African ecosystem. It's never been big. And to add the insult to injury, we're seeing a decline in aid as well. Okay, so we've seen aid decline by almost 30 to 50% in the last 5 or 6 years. In fact, Africa is the only continent in the world where we have more aid than we have startup capital. We have almost 5 times more aid than we have startup capital. So we're seeing aid declining, which means there's less money going into social programs and social investments. We're also seeing our governments becoming more broke as public debt on the continent grows. So the 2 big pots of money that were really driving a lot of our social investments are under huge strain or declining at the moment. To add the insult to injury, we're adding 1 million people a month, or give or take, to the continent. So we have less money and we have more people to serve. And then we have all these global shocks we have to deal with. The Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, Ukraine went into war, a small country, probably the size of half of a quarter of Kenya, and we could not get food on the continent. That's an indictment on us as Africans. How can we not be able to be food sufficient yet we sit on 66% of the world arable land? So when you think about all of that, it pushes us to start thinking differently. Is if we're going to drive sustainable growth on the continent, how else are we going to mobilize the money to close the SDG financing gap that starts at about $200 million a year? It's give or take. And the only place we can get money is in the private sector. So you think globally, we need about $4.5 trillion to solve the SDGs. Global financial markets are sitting at about 100 times that amount. We only need 1% to solve the SDGs. So the problem is the SDGs are seen too risky. So funding SMEs, funding women is seen too risky. The private sector doesn't understand them. Capital markets don't. So in essence, the world of impact isn't short of money. We're short of risk capital. Okay, we're short of risk capital, and risk capital to especially fund and test new products, new markets, new services, new business models. In essence, fund innovation that will provide the kind of solutions that can then be scaled mainly by private capital in days to come. So when you think about what are we doing to do that, and what is the role of philanthropy in this case? So the one thing that's very clear, you realize very quickly that not one pot of capital can solve the problem on its own, not philanthropy, not private capital. Mm-hmm. We need philanthropy to play to its strengths, which is really about risk-taking, to fund this innovation to the point of proof of concept that can then be scaled by the more commercial capital. But that means some big things for us. It means some significant mindset shift, for example. So in development, people in the traditional development space have to be comfortable with making profits as it solves social problems. And profits are not bad in development, so long as they're not exploitative. And in the private sector, to your earlier question, we need to get comfortable with converging profit and purpose, that we can do well as we do good. Okay, so those are some of the things that we need to be thinking about as we go through this transition of what kind of capital, how do we use capital differently, how do we blend this different capital together. As a non-profit today, you need to ask yourselves, can I be totally grant dependent? Or do I have a part of my model that actually can provide a service that I can sell and generate revenue to run my operations? And that is fine.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And it's one of the things that UNFPA, we're trying to do with our projects, especially innovation projects and support for startups, is that if the project does not have a business model, we are not interested. And if it doesn't, we will work with you and partners to develop that business model. Because again, we believe that profitability and impact can coexist. But to start it up, I think you mentioned some very interesting points, which would dovetail very quickly to bring my colleague Uyoyo into the conversation. And Uyoyo Idosio is a principal ICT and innovation expert with the African Development Bank, where she is responsible for developing the bank's digital transformation action plan, which informs the bank's investment in ICT. But also supporting policies, managing loans and grants to government, private sector, and regional economic communities. You're welcome. Now, I want you to dovetail really quickly into the point that Frank left off, which is to look at what opportunities are there for large-scale financing for digital transformation and innovation, especially those driven by multilateral organizations like your one, to, again, finance innovation, but also explore de-risking opportunities for relatively risky startups. And if there are any groundbreaking ideas that you want to share, we're very happy to hear those. Over to you, Yo-Yo.
Thank you so much, Sydney. Apologies, my connection just is not so good. There is a heavy downpour in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, where I'm based. So if you do not hear me, please let me know. Very good points that have been mentioned today. And one thing I would just want to give context to is that we see right now that the startup financing for Africa is dwindling. I mean, in 2023, startup raised 46% less than the previous year. And it's contributing to like local macroeconomic issues happening globally, right? The first market they would exodus is Africa. Just leave VC investors will leave is Africa. And what we see in the VC ecosystem, I don't know if you guys have touched about on this because I was connected, but you see that the VC, that's the venture capital, the private equity, there's a closed niche of people that are almost homogeneous. You went to the same school, you probably look in a certain way, and then their investments are typically following a certain narrative, right? And you find out in many countries. In fact, let's not even go to this ecosystem and their investments in women, because in fact, women are the least likely types of investments that VCs or PE will invest in. So you can say that if you stack it up and bring it to the continent, we need to rethink the way as multilateral development banks that we finance the ecosystem. And so what has the bank been doing? One of the things we've been doing now is taking the discussions in a different dimension. We've been going to sovereign entities because they have a bucket of money accessible in the bank for loans, grants. Every country has an allocation, all the 54 countries. But then, you know, it's easier for a national government to say, I'm investing in roads, schools, and things that I can touch than saying we're going to invest in innovation. What does that even mean? And so for us, we've been on a journey to first correct mindset and then help government to see innovation as an investment stream, the same way they see any other sector. We have been very successful in this, and I'll give you some examples. And so the way we are looking at it is sovereign-backed, but private sector-led type of investment in VC. That's one angle we'll use. So imagine right now, as capital is dwindling in Africa, this is the time that national governments need to start banking on their ecosystem. This is the time as foreign investors leave, that countries should take on their financing, which is based on their sovereignty, and invest in the ecosystem. So this is a classical example of low risk. countries have access to financing over 40 years, and I mean, grace periods of God knows how many years they can get, and even interest rate because of our AAA rating at nothing, really. And so we tried this model where we get countries, and first we tried this out in Rwanda, where the government took a $30 million loan from the bank. But then the twist was that it was then invested in a fund, the Rwanda Innovation Fund, where we got a private sector running it like a pure business, not an NGO, not a social enterprise, a pure VC business. And we got a private sector fund manager to run the project, to run the fund. And then the catch for the private sector was that for every $1 the government has put in, they need to capitalize an additional $1 into the fund from private sector. In fact, that was highly successful because every dollar of the $30 million that the government of Rwanda put was matched with 50% by the private sector, and which also helped in decision making, because essentially then we have a fund that is not only the government being nepotic, or which I don't believe they will, but it's not only the government that has 100% say in, right? It's a mix of private sector and government, and a proper professional fund manager investing for business. Now, on the other end, what the bank did, because we understand that you can't just make access to financing there, you need to bring other elements in the ecosystem, like the linkages to academia, developing the ecosystem so that there will be pipeline. Because you cannot assume that because there is a fund, people will essentially start building their startups. And so on our end, in that same project, what we've done is we're financing ecosystem activities through academia, through incubation hubs, and looking at how we can support programs and incubation activities within the center so that we know and we can assure pipeline into that. The last thing we're bringing into this type of project is enabling policies. You see, for example, when we took the Rwanda Innovation Fund to Rwanda did not even have what they call a limited partnership act. So there was nothing in its policy recognizing the registration of an entity like a VC or a PE. So even if you wanted, and a private sector wanted to register in that market as of 2018, you didn't have anything that recognized you. And so as part of that project, because of our ability to influence policy discussion, the parliament actually enacted a Limited Partnership Act, which on today, Rwanda has several VCs running, but they would not remember that this was one of the catalyzers for such. And so this is an example of how we invest. Now, I come to Nigeria, where the Nigerian government took on this idea. In fact, it's a whole bigger idea in Nigeria, where in the fund side in Nigeria, the government, through the financing from DFIs like the AFDB, the Agence Française Development, and Islamic Development Bank, we are putting in about 276 million, but the private sector is matching every $1. So that's bringing that fund to close to $500 million just for the Nigerian market. So you can see the potential of DFIs. We stand as catalyzers. I mean, in some instances where we invest in sovereign, we stand as first loss guarantee. That gives the private sector comfort to come into this market. One thing that we need to move away from is, I think we need to stop saying investment in startup as humanitarian, because especially startups that are serious to grow, I think that there needs to be a proper business approach. And I'll tell you why. Pitch hard private sector investment. And what we see is almost a regurgitation of startups that don't want to grow. They've been stuck in receiving 10,000 grants in 20 different events, and they're still a startup after 10 years. But then when we've seen a different shift when we come in with equity, when we come with a different financing instruments, when we come in with a proper fund manager that will sit on your books and make sure there is discipline. Because if we want to grow the innovation ecosystem, we must do it right. And I think like there's a room for early stage pre-seed, but when we're talking about decisive growth in the ecosystem, I think that these are the approaches we're saying. I can come back to many points, but I'll pause on there.
Thank you very much, Uyoyo. And I think you raised some very controversial points, and I'm going to go straight into the audience very soon. And I know a few would try to challenge this, especially seeing how the startup community or the startup ecosystem drives, large scale, or SMEs are driving employment and economic empowerment of young people. And so young people are increasingly playing a key role in this. Now, all of these financing that we have been able to mobilize at the macro level, how are we then looking at translating or transferring that level of financing or capital that is available to, for instance, financing startups and financing young innovators who are seeking to transfer their solutions into, the large scale growth to become large scale employers and large scale private sector companies on the continent. So we're open for comments and questions. If you have any question or comments, we will take two of them, two very burning ones. Please put your hand up, but also we are going to look in the chat and see that any of our colleagues will be able to have any points to ask. But I'm going to call my colleague who is on the call as well, Chipo Chimanda, who is a resource mobilization specialist. And he's very excited about this risking facilities. It's one of the things that he keeps talking about, every opportunity that he can have and how we can leverage existing capital from multilaterals and also venture philanthropy, like those that Frank and Uyoyo have both intimated, to look at how we can collectively draw these into financing innovation on the continent. Chipo, what's your take on these? And are young people being dreamy to think that these financing, for instance, some of which Uyoyo has mentioned, will be available to them?
Thanks a lot, Sydney. And it's great to listen to the different speakers about what's happening in the available opportunities. And I think wearing the UNFPA hat, I think one thing for me which comes to mind is about how do we get young people to access those opportunities? I think working with you, Sydney, and working with other partners within UNFPA, where we have tried to look for startups or projects which we can pick them up, leverage them, and as well take them into market. So see how possible can we leverage maybe ODA funding or where we can leveraging other sources of funding which we have within UNFPA to scale up. So my thinking is, I think there's need for some convergence around how do we support them to get to the top, because my thinking is in as much as we can support them at startup level, maybe the prototype and everything, but sometimes I think most of the young people feel left out because the financing is not as easy. So it's not as easy to go and speak to an investment banker, to a venture capitalist, or to speak to these people, speak the language, because these young people are young people. You find the communities, they're creative, they're new ideas, but the questions about how do you get them to be on the table? Do they need support, or do they need someone to handhold them as they go them? So my thinking is maybe we need to think about the missing niggle. Maybe we need a funding which enables that transition phase from when I come up with my startup idea. It could be maybe needing a minimum investment of 10,000 to 20,000 to maybe 50,000 minimum to help me get to the table. Where if I now go to the AFDB, if I now go to DFC or any other partner, they'll be saying, look, your book size matters. We need to have a conversation. But without that, I think most of the partners we have spoken to, it's always about the book size. You say, oh, okay, how much your project is about? How much do you need? They say, maybe I need 25,000. They say, well, we were looking at this size of the book. So I think there's a bit of part of a missing middle, which I think as stakeholders, we might need to think about. That enables that young people, once they have that prototype, which maybe can be supported through government grant funding from a government, from UNFPA and other partners, there is that part where they can test the feasibility of their idea, funded with a very low risk funding from potential partners, which we call the missing middle, hoping that in a year or two, then they can transition into a more larger scale funding, which can be investable. So that's my thoughts, Sydney. Over.
Thank you very much, Chipo, for sharing your ever brilliant thoughts. Now, we have some questions from the audience, and I would like to pick one of them, and I'll bring this to Frank, and then I think Uyoyo and Shiko can chip into this as well, which is looking at what are some of the sectors that are attracting some of the financing that we are referring to. Is it agriculture, education, gender equality, or any of those, especially within the impact space, that have been able to attract these funding? And if there's one example that we can give of one that has transitioned from the early stage, as you have indicated, so moved from that, what I call them pitch coggers, They go from pitch to pitch, they master their pitch and go from pitch to pitch and mop up all the 5,000-10,000 grants that are there for the startup community. Are there any examples of those that have done the transition, and what sectors are they in?
So let me take the first part of the question, and then I can probably answer the second. So the sectors that we see attracting a lot of capital are like fintech sector, renewable energy. Those two are probably some of the ones attracting the most, and then a bit in agriculture. But you see, part of impact investing is to address gaps, market gaps. And as we look at the issue of declining aid, the two most affected sectors, because they're seen as public good sectors, are healthcare and education. And that's where we're finding some of the biggest financing gaps. Not so much how much they're attracting, but the gaps we know what they've got and what is required is biggest in those two sectors. So from an impact investing perspective, the people ask me, what's the difference? So between just investment and impact, so every business, every investment has impact, but not every investment is impact investing. There's two main differences. One is, are you creating additionality? Are you adding to the greater good of people and planet? Are you adding jobs? Are you creating more food security, so on and so forth? And second is intentionality. Are you driving private capital to go where on its own it will not go, to close some of those market gaps? So some of where we're seeing efforts to close the gap is the impact investors appreciate that fintech is attracting a lot of money, but doesn't necessarily need additional help. And I say necessarily in quotes. The places where we need to really support is healthcare and education. And so some of the work we're doing, for example, we're just about to launch a catalytic pool fund. It's a $200 million catalytic pool fund that will be used to de-risk social investments and crowding private capital. We're prioritizing healthcare, water, agriculture, and education. But of course, we could go into a couple other sectors, but those are going to be our priority sectors. And it's all about trying to see how we can close the financing gap in some of those places. But we might have some examples of where some of that transition has been done.
Right.
Sure. Thank you so much. Very good examples. So I could share an example. So I give you an example. So the same Rwanda Innovation Fund I was talking about, we had a health tech startup that when we came, we're barely even doing up to $10,000 a year. But when the fund manager for our VC came on board, I mean, and started putting serious structures in their businesses, guiding them, linking them up with the market. I think as of today, they were about to sign about last year, precisely, a $1 billion contract with Johnson & Johnson. They have expanded into 5 markets. And in fact, during COVID-19, because of how tech-enabled their health logistics system was, they were able to supply the government's need or essential medical supplies because their systems were able to project demand. And so they were able to forecast that and then using AI to make sure that hospitals had constant supply. This was something, a startup that went to zero to about to a revenue of, I think the last time I checked, we checked them was about $1.5 million revenue. But again, I must say something here. There is an ecosystem, right? So we don't expect a startup to come to the AFTB because there's an ecosystem. There's an ecosystem that should work. And I think as development partners or private sector, we need to make sure that everybody in this ecosystem is doing their part. So are the incubators delivering relevant incubation projects for their incubators enterprises, right? Are the local fund managers, do they even understand the type of market they are dealing with, or are they unrealistic, right? And then when you go to the venture capitalists, are they regurgitating biases or just looking to fill up their books? And then you come to development partners like us, are we investing even in the right vehicles, or is it trickling down? I mean, we need to all look at this ecosystem such that we know that if everyone does their parts as an innovative business enterprise, right? Once you get that seed capital, you could go to perhaps grow to early stage financing because the VCs know how to scout you. And as a VC, if you're fundraising, you know that you can come to the bank or you can come to development institutions or even a VC for money, right? We need to make sure that the ecosystem works and is able to deliver. So that's an example of a startup that really, really grew. And again, the reason why they grew was from day one, they got it right. And all of us, we run businesses. I think when we teach social impact in Africa, there needs to be a correction of the mindset that not-for-profit doesn't mean professionalism. And this is where we need to strengthen the capacity of our hubs. In the bank, we have something called the Innovation and Innovation Lab. And what we do is focus on supporting first-time fund managers and incubation hubs with capacity buildings so that they can deliver the necessary business development services to their incubators. And so that we don't have to come into that level. We know that the ecosystem is working such that when it comes to that time, that our funding from the top can ripple down to a micro angle. Over to you, Sid.
Thank you very much, Uyoyo. So just before we wrap up, colleagues, and we're almost close to our end of this session today, I would like to take turns with each one of you and this is a big challenge I'm going to throw to you, to share any one game-changing idea or game-changing solution that you think will transform digital transformation and innovation on the continent, especially for early stage startups, which is where we are looking to focus to ensure that we have a good transition or pipeline of solutions from early stage to growth and investment readiness stage. I'll start with you, Frank, and then I'll come to you, Dr. Gitao, then Uyoyo.
Yes, Sydney, as I mentioned, we are not short of money, we're short of risk capital to fund innovation. And the way we think this should be done is to mobilize grant capital that will come in to offer that risk capital to fund innovation with the view that it might or may not work. But if it does work, it adds massively to the body of knowledge, but also to the ability to mobilize capital for impact and to support our SMEs to grow. So, so this concept of pooled funds and catalytic pool funds more specifically is one we think will have huge success going forward. That's why we're seeding one. It should be going live in the next 2 to 3 weeks. This one is looking at sectors of healthcare, education, water, and agriculture, but the pool fund concept can be applied to any sector. So I'd encourage anyone who's willing to work with us to set up a digital innovation or digital transformation pool fund as one to offer that risk capital to fund early stage innovation, fund early stage SMEs to a point where they can attract more commercial capital as an idea, I think, whose time has come.
Right. Thank you very much. And let me just hold you to this. We're happy to share further this information with the audience that we have access to and within our networks as well. So please do well to get us invited to that launch event for the fund. And I'm sure Chipo is already in conversations. And so we'll see what the opportunities are that we can leverage. Dr. Gitao?
Thank you very much. I've been following this with fascination. Actually wanted to come in when in the previous section. So let me just touch on this, that as in Africa, when you're thinking about a startup, you need to, as Uyoyo has mentioned, about the whole ecosystem. And every time we say ecosystem, most of us who understand it think everybody does understand it. So if you're building, and I would say if I'm sitting in San Francisco or in New York or in London or in Jerusalem, or any other these other major innovation cities, I just need to roll out code, put out a Facebook ads and Instagram ads, and I'll easily get a few customers and get it running. Why? The postal service works, the logistics work, everything works, right? If it's an e-commerce platform. But if you're sitting in Ouagadougou, right? Yes, I would have a great e-commerce app, but I have to think about building out the logistics. I have to think about building out the agency network. I have to think about building out the payment gateway. I have to think about all these other things to make my one e-commerce platform work. So when you think about ecosystem, is that we have to think, and I want to stretch the idea that Frank has mentioned, a catalytic risk fund to more an ecosystem catalytic fund for innovation, is these components that make, and these pillars that make up an ecosystem, who is funding for them? And that's what I mean, this is a discussion we've had with Uyoyo for ages, is how do we start funding to build the ecosystem, the building blocks for our startups to actually be functional? Yeah, and that is something that we need to put at the back of our mind. My favorite book in this space is The Prosperity Paradox. Go and read it. And it's an amazing book because it talks about this idea of building a market, creating innovation, that you're creating a market around your one innovation to make it work. In terms of what I'm bullish about in terms of area, so of course I'm bullish about AI. I mean, if you've heard me speak in the past 2 years, I'm speaking about AI. Why? Because it reminds me of 2007, 2008, and 2009 in Africa when I was doing my graduate research, and we were understanding and trying to understand the role of the internet in Africa's development. And at that time, mobile phones came to play, and most importantly, Facebook came into play. And social media was a tipping point for Africa. Yeah. And I feel like AI is another tipping point for Africa. And the intersectionality for me is with healthcare. I feel like if we can solve for healthcare, AI can be able to solve for healthcare more than it can solve for any other challenge. It can solve for healthcare because diagnosis time and process can be cut down to a fraction of what we currently experience. So for me, if I was going to bet, I'll be investing in AI healthcare startups in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. So your game-changing idea, and I'll come back to you, Dr. Gitau, in one sentence, if you could share that with us. But Yo would come and then I'll come back to you so we can wrap up this panel, and we would see our final video for the toolkits, which we are launching today, and then we close today. And thanks a lot, colleagues, for staying on beyond the time.
Yes. Sydney, I think Shiko has done justice to what I wanted to say. What we're looking at when we say it's an ecosystem, can you hear me? Sorry, everyone. It's an ecosystem catalytic fund. So I give you an example. I was in 3i Summit in Ghana, and I met a lot of fintech startups. And they started opening the dirty things they had to do, bribe officials sometimes with evidence to just get a license to test their products. Some of them were outrightly banned from countries because they were growing too fast, which was a bad thing because then the government then launched a competition, fintech startup. I mean, if you hear the struggles that a lot of fintechs are going through or what they have to vertically integrate, in fact, it will scare you. The other day I was reading about an agri-tech startup that then had to integrate, financial inclusion because none of her workers had a bank account. Then she's then thinking how to create that. There's a lot of obstacles set up in the African ecosystem. And if we don't think of it as a whole, then risk financing just to invest in the startup will fail because they would only grow to a certain angle. For instance, as close as Ghana is to Nigeria, you would not find a startup scaling from Ghana to Nigeria that easily. And so at the bank, one of the things we're trying to do, and one of the game-changing ideas we're trying to push is how do we push for a system which allows free movement of innovators and innovation across Africa, perhaps through a policy sandbox where I have this innovation in fintech here in Abidjan. I know because of the homogeneousness of problems that this could work with a little tweak in Burkina Faso. How can I get it there? The same way we've solved for free movement of people from regions, why shouldn't we start thinking about for innovation? Because if we don't start seeing the one market potential of Africa, where a startup can scale across countries, then all our investments will fail. I mean, countries like Nigeria with the population will swallow that up. But look, imagine Rwanda. What's the population size? What's the market potential of the country? Except we open up for innovation, that I don't think that we would yield the full benefits of innovation. So here's my game-changing idea. On top of the catalytic fund, we think about an ecosystem support fund. But within that, we're embedding the thinking of allowing innovation within a controlled environment like a sandbox and innovators to move across markets. Obviously, not being reckless to policies, on that guided policies, so that we can achieve scale, so that we can achieve a more one market effect, and so that we can start seeing the gains from African innovation. That is my game-changing idea.
Thank you very much. And I believe strongly that's going to change quite a lot for the ecosystem that we work in. And UNFPA is trying to do this on a relatively small scale at the moment within the East and Southern Africa region, where we're supporting 12 innovators that we have worked with in different countries to at least scale to one additional country. And there are a few of them who are on this call I've seen. Unfortunately, we don't have time to have them share, but we would have an opportunity to showcase some of the work that we are doing, and you would see how we can collectively work to scale, but also explore some of these other innovative financing mechanisms that have been mentioned. I'd like to thank all my panelists and all of you for joining this discussion this afternoon. And we believe strongly that there are opportunities that we can leverage and grow innovation on the continent. I'll stop here with the panel and thank all of you. But to hand over to our tech team to share with us the final launch video and then also launch our strategy. And I'll hand over to Georgina to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. We really, really appreciate you. Over to our tech team.
I can tell you how many years it can. The story of young girl that got me. We need something. Yesterday, our feature is actually about health. Last summer, other violence and getting met children. How often and girls can see these objects? Here, around multitudes and girls are taking pro people practices that they can achieve potential. Based on the needs of race, we believe that 26 initiative in a world where young people support transforming their ideas into vibration to the practices of solidarity. World where young people acquire skills to transformation within our hands. Young people create jobs and through any relations with the practice model. And we need to make the unity, resignation, and as people and habits to develop innovation and guidance that startups. It allows young, especially since they go to help us to guide plans to contribute in the conferences like partner.
Right, so we're having a bit of a technical challenge with the sound, but we're going to make this video available to all of you. We have all of your email addresses when you registered. We will share the videos with you. We would also share the toolkit document with you, as well as share with you the strategy document for your reference. The toolkit is available, and it's all around how we can develop innovative solutions around harmful practices, and how young people can work with this self-help tool individually or collectively in smaller groups to develop and grow innovation solutions, ideas into solutions that we can together scale and support behind this big agenda of financing these solutions. We need to have a viable pipeline. And once we have that pipeline, these funding that is available, we will be in the space to be able to absorb them. Over to you, Georgina, to give us the closing remarks.
Thank you, Sydney. My name is Georgina Edwards, and I'd like to give a few closing remarks. I'd like to begin with thanking everyone who attended today. A sincere thank you to the panel speakers. We truly appreciate your experience and insights and greatly value your expertise that enriched this dialogue. I'd also like to thank all the guests and attendees. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join this conversation and really value your contributions in changing the face of financing innovation in Africa. Today, we aim to bring together key stakeholders to explore new frontiers in innovation, particularly innovation in financing and digital transformation in Africa, in order to accelerate and grow our innovation ecosystem on the continent. And given the lively conversation I witnessed today, I'm glad to see that we achieved this goal. So sincerely, thank you for everyone for attending, and back to you, Sydney.
Thank you very much, Georgina, and all the best, all of you, for joining. We really, really appreciate you. You're going to hear from us with all the information that we shared. Colleagues have asked for us to share with them as well some of the resources that we've shared and links to these resources. We will share all of these with you via email with all the links to where you can find all of these different tools and resources. Thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us. We really, really appreciate you, and have the best of the rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.